Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Digitally. Every company I've been working with is actually on a journey of digital transformation. But despite all of the effort and investments that have been made so far, only a few actually have crossed that chasm. There have been many successes on the way, but only a few have truly, actually digitally transformed. And as I look across those companies, there's a few things that stand out consistently, always. And on top of that list of things, of a few things, is this idea of a data-driven culture. But what does that really mean? How do you actually make that happen? What is step one, step two, step three to get there? And really to unpeel that topic and get into this further, I've invited Michael Nirschl. Now, Michael is head of data, analytics, and digital platform strategy at Morgan Stanley's investment management. He's had a broad set of experiences in investment management, not only at Morgan Stanley, but previously at UBS and Goldman Sachs. And he's actually intersected that with some amazing experience in data and machine learning. He, as an example, was at Google running one of the machine learning groups. And so I am super excited, really glad to have Michael here. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for having me.
So let's get started. Michael, we are not discussing any specific corporation here. But if you look across the industry, what does it mean to say a data-driven culture? Give me one or two examples, something that I can look to and say, that is a company that has a data-driven culture. What is it?
So from the outside, the first thing is it something that leadership is focused on? Is it something that leadership talks about? These days, you see increasingly, for example, CEOs talking about generative AI.
Okay.
That is sending a signal of, as a company, we want to focus on this. Internally, it then turns into how does that get translated from intent into strategy, both on the business strategy side, but in particular on the infrastructure side. How is it operationalized in an operating model?
Wow.
And how is the risk managed across?
So those, oh my God, those three are so fantastic. I want to come to that, but let's do that in a minute. Before we get into how do we get there, and I will put you in that position in 30 seconds, but before that, I'm still looking at a company and trying to figure out, are we data-driven, are we not? And I think you said a little bit about leadership. Talk to me a little bit more about what that means. Like, bring me some examples that will tell me, yes, this is a data-driven company.
It's when you have your quarterly business reviews, how many numbers are you looking at? Do you have targets? Do you track actual numbers versus targets? And decide how to take action to either close gaps or how to move forward on a daily basis. What are the metrics? How many people are actually looking at the metrics at various levels of seniority, and therefore are they all aligned around the metrics and all pulling in the same direction? It's across the organization, up and down. Is data being used as the thing that everybody's focused on? Everybody drives towards moving the needle on.
A long time back, I was at another firm, and we had a number of private equity firms that were part of the investors. And one of them, I remember going into an investment committee meeting, and I was told as I was walking in God, we believe, in data, we trust. And it still stayed with me. And so I think your point you're making is, listen, it's easy to say we're a data-driven company, but do you actually fundamentally use data to make decisions? And you either do or you don't. And there's so many companies that have great experiential knowledge and fantastic anecdotal and kind of, insights and intuition. But that's different from running every single thing, every single business decision on actual data. And I think that's what you're bringing out, isn't it?
It's not everything, I would say. Like, judgment will always have a place, in particular in leadership. There's no question. But bringing the lens of, what are the numbers telling me? They're not telling me the full story, but what are the numbers telling me? The advantage of numbers is the facts, right? And that can help you anchor opinions and judgments where there's uncertainty and ambiguity. The combination of the two is when you become really you want to be data driven, but you also want to obviously be leading your peer group. So you don't just want to automatically follow the numbers. You want to be ahead of the numbers, ideally, in the way you're thinking. But you need to know where you're grounded, and the grounding is what the numbers gives you.
I love that. I love that. And I think we've kind of jumped forward to the end point, which is data-driven culture. But I think it's a big journey to get there, right? Because you have to think about customer experience, your internal employee experience. You have to think about the data journey to get to the point you can actually use this data. I mean, that's got to be an easy thing to spot as well, right?
Yes, and it directly touches your clients, and we're all in business to serve our clients. Yes, like, and it's in a business, especially in a business that's reasonably large, it's often not so easy to actually know how do clients feel about either the products or the services we provide. Data is a great starting point for measuring how do clients actually feel. And therefore, now anchoring around, we want to drive client satisfaction. We want to improve client experience. How do we hold ourselves honest? How do we hold ourselves accountable there? That's when data is hard to beat.
I love it. I love it. So, Michael, you've given us some great thoughts on how to know if your company is actually data-driven, and this idea of, are you making business decisions based on that? Obviously, balanced with judgment and such, but really data-driven decision-making, and then actually the journey to get there, the experiences you drive, and then these metrics that you mentioned, those are great indicators. So I love it. So now let's go back to what you were saying, okay, which is we're on a journey to digitally transform ourselves. We've understood from you that one of the drivers, one of the key criteria for success is data-driven culture, and we want to start that journey. What is step one? What is step two? What is step three?
So I think step one always needs to be, you need to root yourself in your business strategy. Ultimately, it's data serves the business strategy, not the other way around. That's very important, and easily overlooked, and usually regretted if overlooked. So start with what makes you really unique as a business, very specifically. If you're a consumer goods company that really wants to differentiate itself in the experience of the consumers that buy their products, right? This is now your anchor. Where do I want to be data driven? I need to collect data about that experience, because that was my statement. That's what differentiates me. That then brings you into okay, I need a strategy for how do I actually gather that data, right? It doesn't come to me. I need to actually build infrastructure that collects it, cleans it, measures it, eventually turns into a dashboard. And now I can start managing for what the dashboard tells me about how our customers are feeling about our products. So there's an infrastructure piece that needs intentional strategy. That then leads you to, you need to operationalize that. There's depending on the industry, there's different levels of manual operations versus automated technology operations. But broadly speaking, there's an infrastructure block that will manage these data flows and bring you the information that you decided is critical for running a business. And then lastly, there's a lot of complexity here. For that complexity, you need to be thinking about what are the key risks that you want to be managing for this, because that could translate directly into business risks, right? You don't want to have blind spots there. Again, you want to be intentional and strategic.
So, Michael, I mean, that's super interesting, because I think you started by talking about the infrastructure strategy and the need to kind of get that in line with your business strategy. And I think the point you're making is start with the business first and then break it down into what is it that you're truly going to use to differentiate yourself with. Then what are the metrics that'll drive that success? And therefore, what is your data strategy? And I think there's a very logical, hierarchical way of thinking, but starting with the right North Star, I totally get that. You then went to talk a little bit about aligning. And I think some of that is investments, isn't it? I mean, don't you actually have to make large amount of investments, and those? I mean, this doesn't come by itself, right? You have to actually proactively go out and get it done. And so, how do you get your investments in line with your architecture strategy and your business strategy? That's going to be a large challenge in a large corporation. And any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, it's you need to think very, very cross-functional there, right? So just based off what we already discussed, you need to have business strategy at the table, because they will hold you honest that you're aligned with business strategy. You need to have operations and technology at the table, because they are the ones that are actually going to implement this piece of infrastructure. You're going to need to have risk functions and probably legal functions, and if applicable to your compliance functions at the table. So that's a very broad group of people. So it's very critical to focus on teamwork over a silo approach.
Yep.
At least at the strategic level, and then figure out how the work that later has to happen will go into subject matter expert functions, but you need to have this layer on the top where you really come together as an organization to make sure you're taking a holistic approach.
I love that, right? Because I've always believed that no longer the tech organization, IT, data, if you will, is the long pole in the tent. It's actually about getting the entire organization and all of your stakeholders on the same table, across the same table, and doing it together. And I think that's nowhere, and nowhere else is that as important as it is on the data strategy. And then I think, so you mentioned that second, then you mentioned risk. So I want to spend a few more minutes on risk, because boy, I mean, just go back to last year. I mean, we've seen a risk after another to another, and now with generative AI, and there's vendor risk, there's supplier risk, there's data privacy, security. How do we? I'm getting started. We're getting on this journey. We're going to become a company that is truly digitally transformed. We're going to be a data-driven culture. Tell me, how do I get started with risk? Like, how do I think about it? How do I put that into practice?
So depends how mature your risk functions are, but most enterprises have one, right? So the first and most important thing is you need to engage them, and engage them early, not close to launch, but during ideation stage, and then work with them, right? If you explain to them, this is what we're planning to do, these are the pieces that are there, this is how we'll interact with our partners in the ecosystem, with our clients externally, with regulators if there's a regulatory context, your risk function typically will be able to identify what the key risks are, right? And this is the team part. Once they identify the key risks for you, you can now think about, how do I mitigate the largest risks, or how do I just capture the risks? So if I get into prioritization exercises, I can do risk-adjusted ROI assessment. So it's typically you have the expertise in the organization already to a large degree. It's a moving space, so you need to keep evolving everybody's skills, but it's really about just bringing all that expertise from the different functions into one room, so that you really can harness the collective abilities that you already have, and you operate as one holistic organization in this space. And that's a challenge, that's complex, but that's where, if you do it well, that will set you up for success.
I love that. So there you have it, folks. I think you said three things, Michael. You talked about infrastructure, strategy, and business strategy, and getting that lined up so you're placing your bets in the right places and getting it right. Number one. You talked about sort of getting the right people around the table on the business side, and this alignment between business and investments and IT infrastructure, and rethinking the operating model and correlating the work you do with business outcomes. That's a big one. And I love what you said about risk, particularly now as we think more broadly about it. How do you make sure that you've got the right participants, the right stakeholders, the right people with the expertise across the table? How do you bring them in on day one, not before you're looking to go live? That's way too late. So you got to design for this at the start. And then I think you talked a little bit about setting on a journey and not thinking of risk as a destination. In other words, the job never ends, right? It keeps changing, it keeps evolving, and you have to be at it. And so it's a journey, not a destination. I love that. Love that perspective. Michael, I couldn't be happier that you joined us today. Thanks for all the great work you do, and thanks for sharing some of that with us. I know you're on LinkedIn. We'll put your link in the broadcast, so I'm sure some might actually want to interact with you, and I'll let you take that on yourself. I just want to thank you for spending time with us, and to our audience, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Sanjay.